All right, so welcome everyone to another great episode of CE Live. And this is Dr. Vishal Sharma. I'm principal at Metanoia Inc. and moderator of the Carrier Ethernet group. And today I'm absolutely delighted to have with us Rami Yaron. And many of you in the Carrier Ethernet group and even in the industry, of course, know Rami. But Rami is co-chair of the Global Marketing Committee of the Metro Ethernet Forum, the MEF. And he is also VP of Strategy and Business Development at Telco Systems. So Rami, welcome to the show this morning.
Hi Vishal, I'm very happy to be here.
Fantastic. Now I am not able to see. Okay, there you are. Great, Rami. So as we were talking, there's been a lot of interest in the group and in the industry in general. Understanding what is going on with the MEF and the developments in the cloud, and we kind of know that there are a number of initiatives that the MEF has that will make Carrier Ethernet more suitable for the cloud. So one of the first things we're really interested in learning is, what are some of those initiatives that the MEF is undertaking for making Ethernet applicable to the cloud environment?
Yes, so there are, Vishal, there are many initiatives that we started 2 years ago. We really started with cloud connectivity. This is one use case. And with cloud connectivity, we are really talking about how to connect between the data center and the end user, or between different data center. It's a work that we started doing with the Open Cloud Connect form. But I have to say that cloud is one of the drivers that cause us to move to more agile and dynamic services. And this is really the move to the third network.
I see. So before we talk a little bit about sort of why the move happened, is there a set of initiatives that the MEF has going right now that relate in some way to sort of dynamic networks and the cloud? I mean, we know about, of course, LSO, and there are some other things in terms of Interconnect and so on. So is there a list of things that we should know about?
So all the things that we discuss, they are related basically to the third network. So if we are talking about interconnect, we are talking about end-to-end services, right? If we are talking about cloud connectivity, we are talking about more agile services. So we can have services that are more dynamic, changing bandwidth when you do pay-as-you-go, maybe, things like that.
Okay, wonderful. So I guess one of the questions that comes to mind there is, so what caused the MEF to change its direction towards sort of more agile and dynamic services? I guess that would be the starting point for all of these various initiatives.
Yes, so there are many things. If we can name some of them. So first, it's the increase in bandwidth consumption. So what you see is that there is more and more need for bandwidth. And there is not much that can be done anymore. There is so much you can subscribe, oversubscribe your network. And there's so much you can charge. There's not much you can do there. So you need to be more efficient, and you need to get more ways to drive revenue. The second, like we mentioned, is the cloud connectivity. So when people start subscribe to cloud services, they see that they can set up the connection fast, they pay per use, and they come back to their service provider and they say, hey, we want the same service from you guys. Why can't we have it?
Sure.
Now, with cloud, I would say there are another two items that I would like to mention. One of them is, in the past, our demarcation was always, it was physical. It was RJ45, SFP. This was the MEF unit. Today, if we want to have true end-to-end service, it can start at a VM.
Yes.
Right? So it's a virtual demarcation. Also, it can pass different technology domain. Today 70% or more of the services are terminated in wireless devices. So we really take care of the LTE, the Wi-Fi, so more technology domain. And lastly, I would talk about the truly end-to-end service. If I'm a service provider in the US and I take care of my enterprise customer in the US, what about the off-net connection? We need to worry about more dynamic and agile services among multiple operators. And VPN over the internet doesn't have quality of service, doesn't have a service. We need to worry about it with regard to MEF service.
Great. So, should we then go do a screen share and go to some of the slides? I know there were some excellent slides that we had to address some of this. Would you like me to go to the slide that talks about the connectivity services?
Let's look at the first slide that shows the evolution of the MEF. This is related to the question you asked, right?
Yes. So let me see. I'm now sharing that. You should be able to see that. Okay,
yes.
There.
Vishal, this slide is showing the move from static to dynamic connectivity, and also the move from physical to virtual connectivity. So when we started with the Carrier Ethernet 1.0, if you can use the animation there.
Yeah, there you go.
This was really replacement of TDM services, replacement of legacy services. So we worry about mimicking the connectivity that we have. So today, if we take EPL, for example, it's exactly like the TDM point-to-point connection, right?
Sure.
And when people start being used to Carrier Ethernet services, then we had to enhance them. This is where we introduced the C2.0, the multi-class of service, more management to the service, and we also introduced the Interconnect. We started talking about global services, not just macro services. So now we are talking about services around the globe among multiple operators. This is the.
So that's where the interconnect, the idea of interconnect became a lot more important and needed to be formalized.
Yes, yes. Today, businesses are all over the globe. So if I connect enterprise to all its branches, I have to use other operators.
Exactly.
I think it will be more and more important with the third network, as we'll discuss later.
Sure.
Now, the move to the third network is the move to more agile and dynamic services, but on the same time, we want them to be assured. We want them to have SLA, and we want them to have secure and orchestrated end-to-end, both on physical demarcation and also virtual demarcation among multiple operators and also among multiple network domains, technology domains. And we want all of that to be very dynamic. So it will be very fast to establish a connection and change some parameters in it.
And of course, as you said earlier, Rami, all of this is coming primarily from the fact that now you can have things originating in a virtual domain. You have things terminating on mobile devices. So clearly, mobile devices means dynamicity and agility, because that's what the customer has gotten used to expecting from the cloud, over the top guys, and therefore even the infrastructure providers have to have similar, ability to match that.
Absolutely, absolutely. I would say we are lagging behind, and we need to catch up, like the cloud operators. Yes.
Okay, so that's actually good. That kind of gives a good perspective on why the MEF decided to move toward these agile services. And I guess then the question is, well, what's the third network? Okay, yeah, you gave a bit of a picture about it, but what's the vision? What's the third network all about? So should we go to the next slide?
Yeah, we can. Let me talk about it a little bit, and we can go to the next slide. So just to understand what's going on, if we look today at what we have in the world, we really have two types of networks. We have the internet, and we have the carrier Ethernet. The internet is dynamic, it's agile, it's available almost everywhere. But as we said before, we don't have SLA, we don't have class of service. On the other hand, when we look at Carrier Ethernet, we do have a class of service. We have SLA.
Sure.
Assured, it's secured. but the model that we were using up till now was a long-term commitment for a fixed SLA.
Yes, yes, indeed.
Now, let's think what happened if we take the best of both. So the third network is really taking the agility from the internet and taking the class of service availability from the care Ethernet and have a service that is agile dynamics, but also assure and secure and is available everywhere you have a connection. So we can take a look at the slide now on that slide. And this is one example here. So if I'm in the office, I have a connection. It's not going through the internet. It's a private connection to one of the operators. What happens if I'm in a hotel or at home? I would like to have similar connection.
Sure.
That is assured and secure and available where I am. That's the main idea.
Sure.
And in order to do that, the operator need to manage all the pieces, whether it's Wi-Fi, LTE, or optical, and also have a connection among them. So if I'm in a hotel in Hong Kong, I can still have an assured connection to my headquarters or to my customers. So first of all, it's money that can be made there because people are willing to pay for it.
Yes.
And the other thing, we need to define it. We need to define it in a very dynamic way so people can establish a connection for 2 hours, let's say, or 3 hours, and then turn it off.
But this requires, and that's a little bit of a segue, but this requires a significant, which I guess the MEF is doing, an education of the operators. I mean, the operators themselves are, of course, conscious of it because they're looking at providing value-added, revenue-generating services. So this kind of ties in with that desire from the service provider community. But at the same time, I guess it does require significant transformation in many of the service providers. And so, that, I guess, and as you said, to tie all these pieces together, you need some kind of an orchestration, management, advanced capability, because that's what's really going to make this all happen, right?
Yeah, so this is a use case. What I discussed here is one use case of connectivity around the globe. There are many other use cases that we can discuss. And the third network is about dynamic services, right? So what we need to do is first to make sure we can work on multiple domain and also multiple operators networks. So
sure.
We need to have a way to orchestrate the service end to end. And to do that, we are talking about the LSO, the Lifecycle Service Orchestration, to orchestrate those dynamic services among technology domain, among operators, and have a dynamic service end to end.
So that's interesting. So maybe, I mean, we hear a lot about life service orchestration. I mean, it came on the scene with a very big bang, maybe a year and a half ago, as these notions started to become more formalized. But maybe you can, talk a little bit about what is really the key salient features of this LSO initiative. I mean, yes, there's a lot of talk, but what's behind all that? It would be interesting to shed some light on that as well.
Yes, so yes, the LSO, the Lifecycle Service Orchestration, is really a combination of management and control capabilities. That with them you can automate the entire service lifecycle. So the capabilities are fulfillment, performance, control, assurance, usage, analytics, and security. And we are trying to define those attributes and then the API that needed in order to manage it. So in the slide here, what we can see, and I'll talk more about the LSO, On the slide that you see here, we are talking about connection, that the demarcation can be either a device or VM.
Yes.
And also, each operator has multiple technology domain, like VPLS or Ethernet or OTN, and we really need to orchestrate all of that. And in order to do that, we need the LSO. So each operator will have its own LSO. It can be one system, it can be multiple systems. We really define the capabilities.
And then I guess, where does the word life cycle originate from? That why do we call it life cycle? What life cycle are we referring to, or does the MEF refer to when we say life cycle?
Yes, so we refer to the life cycle of the service. So
Okay.
it can start from what service to select. So we need to come with very abstract definition of the services. And then it can be the fulfillment, the analytics, the statistics, and with the orchestration system, we can do everything much faster if we define the right interface. So let's try to talk about the goals of the LSO.
Sure.
So first is the separation between the infrastructure and the control and orchestration. So today operators have different layers. In each layer they have multi-vendors devices. All those devices tie to their own management and control systems.
Indeed.
Sometimes for each attribute you have different management and control. Like for analytics, you can have one system and another system for other attributes. We would like to have a separation between the infrastructure and the orchestration layer. So basically, all those functions, we'll define them and we'll define the API to use them. And if people support that API, they can have a true separation. That's one thing.
Sure.
The other one is actually to make sure we have an abstract contract for service definition. So when you, as a user, order a service, you don't really care what technology is used to carry that service. If it's virtual technology, if it's SDN, if it's optical, you don't really care. So if we have abstract definition for the services that connect to the web portal of the user, to the OSS and BSS, to some business application, we can also solve the business agility. And in this case, operator can move much faster when having those services.
So this goes back to the notion you mentioned earlier in the discussion, Rami, which is that today you eventually want to get to the notion where I, as a user for whatever business application, can ask for a connection for a certain finite amount of time and then tear it down. And so the service, in fact, can be pretty. It doesn't have to be long term like we used to have in the EPL and the EVPL days. It can be a very short term service, few hours, maybe, few, I don't know, eventually even tens of minutes, and it should be able to be possible to set it up and then tear it down. And that's the kind of orchestration that we need to eventually get to.
Yes, so one example, in my company, telco system, we have a sales meeting 2 weeks from now. So it would be nice if we can go to the service provider and ask them to up the bandwidth for the sales meeting.
Sure.
So for 4 days, it will be double the bandwidth, and then go back to the original SLA, right? And we are willing to pay for it. We had this agile service, right? And this is the idea. Now, those two things, the infrastructure agility and the business agility, they are fairly easier to get than the Then the third thing, and the third thing that I want to mention is the end-to-end service among different technology domain and among different operators.
Sure.
So as I said, I don't care if the service is over MPLS or over optical. But those APIs will have different APIs for the different technology domain, and we also will have east-west APIs to different LSO of different operators. So operator among themselves will be able to have the same dynamic end-to-end services that include many operators. So I can have the same service I can have between Boston and Washington. I can have also between Boston and Hong Kong.
So are we talking about, just to kind of understand this a little bit better, so are we talking about, when we talk about lifecycle service orchestration, that's a concept, but then you mentioned a couple of things that kind of stuck out at me, which is that an operator would need to have orchestrators that can do this lifecycle service orchestration. Now, is the vision from the MEF that, you know, there would be sort of multiple orchestrators even within one operator, or are we thinking that, you know, essentially one operator has one orchestrator and that's talking to other operators, or how would this work?
So that's a good question. We define the different attributes, the different capabilities of the LSO. How it's being built, it's a different question. Yes, it can be built as one system. It can also be built as multiple systems together. We don't have a problem with that.
I see. Then one more thought that comes is, so the at least from the MEF's perspective, or sort of your perspective, Rami, when you think about the orchestrator, you're thinking of that as a piece or let's call it intelligence, which is separate from, we hear about the SDN controllers nowadays, right? Everybody's talking about SDN, NFV, and the SDN controller is a big piece of that. So is the orchestrator, in your view, something that is sitting above the SDN controllers, or is it something that can be co-located? What's the thought? And I know that there may not be one sort of quick best answer, but I'm just wondering, you know, what the general thinking is.
No, that's a good question. Actually, this morning I had a call, our weekly call with the ONF, talking how to define the interface between the LSO and the SDN controller.
Okay.
So yes, as you see on the slide, there are many APIs. One of them to the SDN controller, another one to a cloud orchestrator, another one to the NFVO, right, and one for the legacy one controller. So yes, the orchestrator should have a southbound interface to the different technology domains, and also east-west interfaces to different
operator domains.
LSO.
Sure. So I guess one question is, you know, where may the members of the community and the Carrier Ethernet group, for example, go for more information on this? You know, are there any white papers or presentations that I know there's a lot of stuff that's been published on the LSO, so obviously we can't list them all, but is there anything notable that comes to mind that you might just point people to so they can start going and learning about some of this?
Sure, there are a few places that would be very easy to get to.
Okay.
The first one is go to MEF.net, MEF.net, and we have two white papers under the section of white paper. One is the third network vision, talk about the third network, and the other one about the LSO.
Okay, great.
Another good resource, if people have time, we just completed the webinar on the third network and the webinar on the LSO. So we have two webinars under Bright Talk that people can, they are already recorded, people can listen to them.
Great. Actually, the third network webinar, we had an announcement of that in the Carrier Ethernet group also. So, and you know, that is something that I provided a mind map. I provide a mind map of kind of the weekly, you know, discussions organized by category. So we did have that as a link in that mind map. That's a clickable mind map that is available to everybody who is talking about, who's part of the group. And so this slide, I just wanted to bring this up. So this kind of brings the entire picture together of where the the third network concept is realized using the orchestrator, if I'm getting this right. Is that correct?
Yeah, so this is one use case that show basically a different connectivity. So you have two providers, and you really want to have end-to-end service. So just to make sure people understand, so each operator has its own LSO that manage its own network, and this
Sure.
LSO is connected, has API to the different technology domain, whether it's MPLS or SDN domain, and the demarcation between them.
Sure.
As you can see, one of the operators has also another layer of the LSO, and this is a layer of the end-to-end LSO. So this layer actually responsible for the east-west communication.
I see.
When the user connect to that LSO, it connect to the end-to-end lifecycle service and ask for its own service. Very abstract definition. It doesn't. That user doesn't need to know how the service is going to be established, and if it's more than one operator. We ask for the connectivity, and then the end-to-end LSO is responsible to provide the request for service for its the own network of the own operator, and also to the LSO of that other operator that need to complete the service end-to-end.
Okay, okay, great.
End-to-end LSO is responsible for everything else, statistics, analytics, or everything that is related to end-to-end services, getting the information from the specific LSOs.
And then one of the things I'm seeing here, Rami, is there are 3 layers of APIs that are clearly very critical for communication between the operator LSOs and the east-west coordinating LSO, if you will. And then there's APIs between the LSO at each operator level to its various technology domains, whether virtual or real. So I'm assuming that these APIs, are they being defined right now? Have some of them already been defined? Could you comment on where this kind of work is? Because it seems that that's kind of pretty critical to making this whole picture work, right?
Yes, so there are many different initiatives in the MEF and with the MEF and other organizations to define those APIs. So for example, we are working with, as I said, with ONF on define the interface between the LSO and the SDN Controller. We are trying to work with HCNV to define the interface between the LSO and the NVO. We are working with TM-Form to define the interfaces and the services, actually, the services definition. With regard to information and data models, data modeling, we decide to go with Young for Care Ethernet services. So there are many initiatives with regard to those interfaces, yes.
Okay, so actually that kind of answered partly one of the questions I had for a little bit later on, which is, how is the MEF ensuring that it's not operating as a silo? And I think you've just pointed out that the MEF is pretty cognizant of the fact that, in today's environment, you cannot just work as an isolated organization. And so you need to have, liaisons and relationships and partnerships with a lot of other standards bodies. And it looks to me that the MEF is, so I'm going to just stop the screen share now, because I think, yeah. So it looks to me that the MEF is actually, has kind of recognized that, because that's one of the things that is very important for a standards body to remain relevant.
Sure, yes.
And then I guess one thing that I want to go back a little bit, Rami, and get to, Okay, so we talked about the LSO and the vision that's coming out, but one thing we didn't ask, and let me ask one of those little sort of hard-hitting kind of questions is, why is the MEF the right place to be talking about the LSO in the first place? I mean, given that there are so many standards bodies which are all, looking at this dynamic, agile, network environment. So why does the MEF think it's the right place to initiate something like this?
Yeah, that's a good question. Many people ask me every time I speak about it. People ask me if the MEF is the right place to define it. And just to remind you, Vishal, MEF membership has more than 50% service providers as members, right? So the nature of the MEF is always to look at the services from a very high layer. So we always look at the services from the business side. How do you buy services? What is the need from the customer? When you have an organization that is mostly vendors, you get the view of the operator or the customer. When you have an organization that most members are service provider, you get the view of the end user, which is very, very important here. That's one thing. The other thing, MEF has really good credibility in the market and the whole industry, defining the retail services, the E-Line, E3, E-LAN, and also the wholesale services, the E-Access and the upcoming E-Transit. And I think that those services are very, very important in order to get end-to-end service among multiple operators and have it dynamic and agile in real time. And I would say the third thing is that, when you look at SDN and NFV, most organizations are really focused on solving the infrastructure agility, to separate between the devices and the controller. Which is good. MEF is also aiming to solve the business agility, have abstract construct to order services. So basically, you don't tie the services with the technology. Service catalog. We're already working on it for 2 years.
So actually, that's great, because there were three different interesting things I heard in what you said there. I'm just going to recap that, for the benefit of those who will be looking at it. One is that, the MEF has at least 50% or more operators, and that brings in the very important operator perspective, who are actually the consumers of all of this advancement that we as an industry are doing. So I think that is not something that is of insignificant value. And then the other is that MEF has been instrumental in defining many of the building blocks, the EVPLs, EPLs, the services, the interconnects, the unis, the NNIs, that are essentially the infrastructure layer building blocks that we need to realize these advanced services. So the MEF has already done that groundwork, and that work is in use. It's recognized in the industry, and the operators are beginning to use it in a big way. And that forms the foundation of a lot of what MEF is building on with this third network LSO initiative. And then the third is, I think that you're one of the few organizations which is beginning to look at it from the business perspective. The other organization that comes to mind, and that they also have transformed themselves over the years, is the TM Forum. They also now, in the last few years, have been talking a lot about sort of the business of networks, as opposed to just the infrastructure, bits and bytes of networks. So I think the MEF is also one of the few organizations that looks at business. And how do you, that's why you have, when you look at the multi-layer diagram you showed us, there is this business APIs and the idea of enabling business services, which is not always the case with many other bodies who are looking at different pieces of this puzzle.
Yes, I would like to mention, so first, we are working a lot with the TM Forum, and to capture it really right. The main objective is to make sure we are consistent. So what we define is consistent with the rest of the industry.
Sure. And that also goes back to the point about relevance, that you cannot really operate as a silo. You have to make sure that there's enough outreach and cross-pollination happening with other industry bodies, so that anything that is defined is consistent and is building on things that have already been defined, not only within the MEF, but maybe in the other standards, SDOs as well, so that is really where how the industry can benefit from the effort. Otherwise, all we are doing is creating more confusion.
I would agree with that, Vishal. I want to mention the program that we have called Unite. So the Unite program is a program that encourage open discussion with other organizations.
Oh, cool.
The whole idea is to make sure we are aligned with our standards. So, and I mentioned many of the organizations we are working with. We are trying to make sure we are aligned with everybody. So, for example, I'll give you one example. Cable Labs, they have a project called VCPE. So their initiative is to create an interface for an API for clear internet services. So far, they did they created the UNIs and the EPL and the EVPL. So they basically focus on E-line. It's a reference code that is really based on MEF standard. Now, I believe we should talk to them, but I believe they are going to contribute it to OPNFV. So it will be a reference code to continue development. So yes, we need to work together, and we need to make sure we are aligned and consistent with our definition with the rest of the industry.
Great. And then one thing, of course, I wanted to, also quickly touch upon is, you talked about the operators being members of the MEF, but one thing I do have to observe is that if you look at the list of operators so far, it's largely, the really big guys. And while, they're, of course, the trendsetters in the industry, they have the resources to do a lot of this stuff. I think we cannot really forget what I like to call the emerging operators, which are there all over the world, but particularly in the US, we have, I don't know, several hundred, tier 2, tier 3 operators, some of whom are not that small, some of whom are, are fairly small, tens of millions of dollars to, I don't know, $500 million range. And I heard recently, Danielle was mentioning, and I've been looking at some of the initiatives where the MEF is kind of allowing, has a more inclusive approach, where it's, trying to bring the smaller operators in. So can you maybe tell us what are the ways the MEF is doing that, and how could the smaller operators be involved in some of this activity?
So I'll start from saying that everybody can benefit from MEF membership, and the MEF standards are open to everybody. So yes, if you're a member, you can influence the standard, and you can also see where the wind is blowing and what's going on with the standard before we publish it. So this is the advantage of members, and you can influence on what the thing that you're lacking. But also, if you are not a member, just following the MEF and following the different standards, you can gain a lot. I'll give you one example just to show it's a small mobile operators that I met, I think a year ago, and they told me that they were moving from one class of service to multi-class of service.
Sure.
What they did, they form a cross-functional team, because the wireless guys, they usually don't talk to the backhaul guys. They assume that the network is infinite bandwidth and zero delay.
Sure.
But in this time, they had to talk to categorize the different stream coming from the LTE radio into different class of service. On the LTE it's 9, on the backhaul it's either 2 or 3. It took them a year of meetings, and they got to a list on how they want to split the different services. And you know what? Then they found that MEF 22, we already did the work for them.
I see.
And we actually compare and the recommendation of the MEF to what they come up with, and it was almost the same. So they could have saved a year work of all those meetings, cross-functional team meetings. So that's an example. Now, what you mentioned, the program that we have for small operators, it's called the MEF Service Interconnect.
Yes. And what was that about?
Yes, so this is what we found out is that there are many small operators that have a lot of interconnect points, and they are asked by the large operators that they are connected. They are asked to have a C2.0 certified interconnect.
Interconnect, exactly. Sure.
That's the issue. Now, they came to us and say, listen, we are small, we don't have resources to be MEF members, and we don't think we have the resources to influence and contribute. But we
Sure.
want to certify our services. And today, operators that would like to certify the services need to be a MEF member. So with the MEF SI, what we did for small size operator, and we actually check it, they can certify their services, be on the MEF registry, but not being MEF member if they don't, if they elect not to be a MEF member. So.
And then, so there's a well-defined, I mean, the size is defined by what? By customer base or by revenue or geographic scope, you know, or combination?
I believe it's by revenue. I didn't look at.
Okay. No, I'm just wondering what, okay, sure.
But
So there is some well-defined criteria according to which you define a small operator.
yes.
And those that satisfy that can at least participate in getting the service interconnect portion of their services, you know, approved or certified and so on.
Yes, so they can certify the services, and this is also help us with the third network, because we really need global reach. So one building block is the in and I and the access, right?
Sure, sure. And so then coming back to the question as to, you know, how they can get involved. Of course, as you said, they can, you know, smaller operators can probably get involved in the MEF more formally, but at least they can start getting involved, in terms of looking at all the output of the MEF, particularly the multi-cause and multi-class of service work, which is becoming more and more useful with the wireline and wireless networks, you know, having a closer interface. And then they can participate in the service interconnect sort of initiative, which I think is a big value, because that allows them to then in turn go to the bigger operators and prove to them that they have Ethernet services that are, you know, that qualify above a certain standard, basically. Right?
Yes, yes, absolutely, absolutely. It's more than that. I think they are gaining much more than that, because I spoke with operator that told me that before C2.0 e-access, it took them sometimes 6 months, sometimes 9 or 12 months to establish a connection.
Wow.
In order to align the different attribute of the different operators. Today, if both operators have C2.0 equipment at the interconnect, it can be less than a month, it can be up to 2 months, maybe 3 months, I don't know, depend on the rest of the issues, but it's
Sure.
definitely faster than the legal agreement, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I guess, and then in close, so that's great. Actually, we've kind of covered a lot of ground in this discussion. And I think at least it's given people, I would believe, a bit of a perspective on, you know, what is the sort of genesis of this move from the MEF to more agile services, and why, you know, the notion of third network came up, how lifecycle service orchestration fits into that vision, you know, what different operators can do, what the MEF is doing in terms of at least what are the bodies it's interacting with. Of course, one can go to the MEF website and kind of see more formally the different initiatives, or, you know, they can obviously post comments to this video or the post that we're going to create about it. And then the last thing I wanted to definitely close off with is that we have the Carry Ethernet for the Cloud Age workshop that's coming up, you know, later this week, actually early next week in Chicago. And obviously, Rami, you're going to be there, and the MEF has been kind enough to participate in that. So one thing that's always useful for people to know is, you know, why does the MEF think that it's worthwhile for it to sort of spend its energy participating in a workshop like that? You know, what is the, you know, what from the MEF's perspective and your perspective, what's the value of that participation?
Yes, so first of all, part of the MEF mission is to educate the industry on the current and future work. You know,
Sure.
white papers that we mentioned, to webinars, seminars, and workshops. So I looked at BTE, and it looks like great opportunity to reach out to the big and also the small service providers. So for me, it's a no question. Yeah, we will present the MEF vision, what we are doing, what we are planning to do. It was also easy decision to my company. Telco System is also participating there with the NFV demo. It's one of the biggest events in the US. Yes, we'll definitely touch many service providers with our current and future work.
And you're also anticipating that at the workshop, the discussion that are possible, not just with the other panelists, but even with the attendees, should provide good feedback to again, to work that is going to happen in the MEF and the future work that the MEF may be looking at, right?
Yeah, so it's not only the MEF, in event like this, yes, you can hear from industry leader, from SDO and other organizations such as the MEF, but you can also hear from other operators, right? So you hear about success story, you hear about lesson learned. I think overall it's a good event. Both the workshops and the rest of the event. I think it's great to participate in that event. I'm sure it will be a good one.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. Well, Rami, I really wanted to thank you for your time for making this happen. I know you have a very busy schedule, so I'm glad you could take the time to sit down with us and talk about a little bit the vision of the MEF. So I want to thank you for the time, and I want to thank everybody who's going to be viewing this. As I mentioned, there's going to be a lot of resources we're going to make available as as an addendum to this video and the post that we'll create on the Carry Ethernet group. So I'm hoping that this will serve as archival material for people who want to learn more about this and at least give them a good introduction to some of the activities. So Rami, thanks again for the time, and I look forward to doing this again, on another topic at some point in the future.
Excellent. Vishal, thank you very much for the opportunity. And for the people who listen to us, if you're in Chicago next week, please come join us at the Carry Ethernet workshop.
All right, Rami, you take care. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.